time of day it is. It is the second Sunday. And by the second Sunday, I mean it is time for the worldwide story round. And that's fantastic. It is going to be hosted on every story round by the amazing Mike Russ from Get a Word in Edgeways. So over to you, Mike.
Well, welcome again. It's the Sunday, it's every other Sunday, it's 7 o'clock in the evening, and I'm looking out over the Shropshire Hills, and it's daylight now, and by 9 o'clock it'll just be getting dark. Shropshire, for those of you who don't know, is on the English side of the Welsh-English border, about halfway up. And it has been said many times, but not by me, that our job is to keep the Welsh out. I never say that. I always welcome them in, apart from when we're playing rugby union, which is a game we play over here for those people from the estates and from Greece and Italy and places, that with a pointy-ended ball. And there we go. Right. So the idea, for those of you who haven't been before, is just as the story round. You sit and tell stories to me, I collect them, and then go and tell them to everybody else. It's as simple as that. And I've been doing it for about, God knows how many years now. I told the first story at the first festival at the Edge, which we created, and I've been telling stories since the 1970s personally. So that's how far I go back. I'm just not better than anybody else. I've just been doing it longer. That's all we say. It's as simple as that. So we're going to have a batting order. We're going to start with Despina, then we're going to go to Colin, and then we're going to go to Kath Edwards. And then, John, are you doing some poetry tonight, or are you telling stories? Well, you're muted, so.
There we are.
No.
I think I'd know where my mute button was after 2 years of Zoom. But yeah, I'd love to do some poetry tonight. I, in fact, have my poetry bag next to me. I think I feel like being a poet this week rather than a storyteller.
Yeah, so the workshops that we do here, the story rounds and the festival we've got, our festival's called Get a Word in Edgeways, which is in conjunction with the World Storytelling Cup tonight, is stories, but it's the spoken word. So it's poetry, it's monologues, it's comedy. If you talk to the comics, they call us the traditional storytellers because they call themselves the storytellers and things like that. Okay, so as long as it's the spoken word and you don't stand up and say, well, here's a story, I'm going to sing it, you're very welcome to come. It's as simple as that. So we're going to start off with Despina. Now then, Despina, all the way, you're going to introduce yourself. You're saying your story comes from Armenia. So where are you exactly in the world?
I'm in a tiny little spot on the map called Syros. It's a little island in the middle of the Cyclades in Greece.
Yeah.
But my story comes from a bit further ahead, all the way to Northern Asia, from Armenia.
Because there's a lot of trouble over in those parts of the world, so you make sure you're safe, okay?
Absolutely.
Right, so as always, if we ask you to mute yourselves as we go into the stories, and if anybody wants to do something, I'm going to sit here until everybody who wants to do something has had a chance to do it. So welcome to you all. Despina, will you kick us off, please?
Absolutely. So I should tell you that at that part of the world, Armenia, they have this grand, big lake. They call it a lake, but it's a sea, really. Still, they call it a lake, and they call it Van, the Van Lake. So our story starts there, because there was this fisherman who would go in Van Lake to fish. One night, he took his net on his back and started working towards the lake. And when he got there, he could see all of the stars bright in the sky, and the sea, well, Van Lake was so calm, it seemed as if those two merged into the horizon. So he put his net inside his boat and started rowing and rowing and rowing. And as he was rowing his boat, it seemed like he was turning the pages of a very old book with every row he made. When he reached the part of the Lake Van where he knew that the fishing was good, he stopped and let go his net inside the lake, waited for a little while, and then started dragging it out and it was heavy. So he was happy. He thought he had got good fishing this time. So he drew his net back with all his might because it was so heavy. He managed to lift it and put it inside his boat. And when he did, he realized that the stars he was seeing in the sky, the stars that were reflected on the waters where he fished, these stars were what he had caught. He looked at the bright stars in his boat and said, "What do I do with the stars? These are no fish. I cannot sell them. I'm so unlucky tonight." He rowed his boat back towards the shore, took the net on his back and started walking to his house. And he started calling for his wife. "Wake up, come out and see what I caught tonight." His wife woke up, came out of the house, and was amazed to see this net full of bright stars. He said, "Husband, they're so beautiful." "Well," he said, "what do I do with stars? These are no fish." "Fish," she said, "fish, look at them. They're so pretty." And she started dancing and singing and touching the stars and hugging her husband and kissing him. And she told me, "What do we need fish for? These are wonderful, husband. You should go out in the morning and sell them." So he did. Early at dawn, he put all the stars into his carriage, which we'll from now on call the star carriage. And he made his way to the village. When he got there, early in the morning, he started calling out to the people, "I sell stars, good stars for sale. Come out and get what you pick." So people were amazed. They opened up their windows and their doors to see what he was on about. And they were so surprised to see the bright stars in his carriage. The kids were there, the girls were there, everybody was there touching the stars, and they were so pretty. And the girls started putting them on their forehead and on their hair and putting them as earrings and around their necks. And the kids would say, "Can we have some stars, please? Please, fisherman, will you give us some stars?" He said, No, I do not give away my stars. I only sell them for money." And that's exactly what he did. The milkman got 2 big stars and placed them on the horns of his great cow. And the shepherd took some and put them on the best ewe. And who else? Well, there was the farmer, of course, who took a bunch and placed them all around his wagon, the one he used in the farm, obviously. And the ladies, of course, they decorated themselves and their houses. And if somebody had a shop window, well, it would be surrounded by beautiful, bright stars. So everybody got some. And some girls would say, "Fisherman, those stars are so pretty. Would you give me some?" But you said, "No, I only sell my stars for money." And some of the girls said, "We're alone here. Do you think we could find another way for you to give us some stars?" But he would go, "No, not interested. I only sell my stars for money." So he was almost done selling. He had but a few stars in the back of his carriage until there was only 1 star left. And he was making his way to the exit of the village when there, in a very poor shed, there lived the town's poet, the musician, they called him. He was a songwriter, and his guitar on the wall was his only possession. Now the poet, he had been looking at the stars in the sky. He had been dreaming of stars. He had been writing songs about them. So he went out on his threshold and saw the fisherman passing with this bright star left on the back of his carriage and said, "Fisherman, Achbair," which in Armenian means brother. "Fisherman Achbair, will you please give me the last star?" The fisherman was like, "No, I only sell my stars for money. If you have no money, you get none." "Please, fisherman Achbair," said the poet, I have no money. Here, I want the star so much. Here, you can have my soul. Take my guitar, he said. But the fisherman would not have it. He did not want the guitar. He was interested in money, nothing else. So he kept going on his way. The musician pleading behind him. And he found somebody else to sell his last star on the road. And the musician was so unhappy. Let's leave them there. The one on his carriage with his horse going away, and the poor musician totally miserable behind him, pleading still. Now, in the dead of the night, when everybody was asleep in the village, were there bright stars everywhere? In the middle of the village, in a well, there started this great wind blowing from the bottom of a well, and it was blowing and blowing and getting bigger and bigger, and out of the well it went, and all around the village, and everywhere it passed from the farm, and it passed from the goat, and it passed from the women, and it passed from the houses. Everywhere it passed, it took the stars with it, whirling and swirling around the village until it had got every star with it. And then off it was. Now, when people woke up the next morning, they realized that all the stars were gone. So they started complaining and getting more and more agitated and angry, because that fisherman must obviously have been a con man. He had sold them nothing. He had just taken their money away. So they were ready to go after him. Asking around, they saw that he had taken the way up to the mountain, so they followed. And there, they found him, turned into stone. He and his star carriage, devoid of stars now. They were turned into stone, and the musician was nowhere to be seen. But they say that this wind, the wind that blew and took all the stars with it, had also taken the musician along with his guitar up in the sky among the stars, so he could play his music for them forever after. And that is the end of my tale for today.
Oh, that's lovely. And it's certainly a new one on me. That's a lovely story. Well told. Thank you very much. Right.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go to Colin Unwin next from Larne in Northern Ireland, and then to Kath Edwards. And after that, we'll have some poetry from John. So Colin, Larne, isn't it? I believe. Larne, it is?
I have to correct you in this every time, John. Larne is the port, or sorry, Mike. Larne is the port where the boat comes in. I'm up in the Glens of Antrim, which is a mere 12 miles away, but there's a distinct difference. There's a distinct.
Oh, okay. Well, I have been known to get the wrong country, so 12 miles is quite close. Anyway, we'll go to Northern Ireland. We'll go to the county Ulster. I can't do anything wrong with calling you Ulster, whichever way we call you. Okay.
All right, Mike. Thank you. Well, Baba C was asking me or telling me about the weather there, and I was telling him about the weather here. It's typically Irish May weather, wet, windy, and warm. And I want to tell you, all my stories are from this wee tiny part of the world, the northeast coast of Ireland, or almost all of them. And I want to tell you about, and May is a beautiful month. It's my favourite month, and the birds are singing, the weather's usually beautiful, but we always have the possibility of that wind. And you get these really strong, swirling winds, a bit like the wind in Despina's story, that sweep across the North Channel. And the North Channel is that narrow stretch of water, 12.5 miles, that separates Scotland from Ireland. And those winds can be as destructive as any winter gales. Well, I want to tell you about a young girl called Morag, and she lived on a wee island called Islay, which is on the southwest Scottish coast. And she was courted all summer long by a young lad called Rory, and Rory lived on Rathlin Island, which is in the northeast corner of Ireland. So there's only half a day's sailing between those two little islands. And young Rory, he was a fisher lad, and he used to travel back and forth often, and he courted young Morag all summer long. And when he would go over to Islay, they would walk along the western shore of Islay, and young Morag would say to Rory, "Tell me, my love, when we are married, where will we live?" And he would always point across the North Channel, looking towards his native island of Rathlin, and he would say, "That's where we'll live when we're married." So this love took its natural course. And in May the following year, didn't young Morag fall pregnant? Well, as her mother said to her father, she's not the first and she won't be the last. Well, of course, he was quite upset about this, but anyway, as her waist began to thicken, a wedding was hastily arranged, and despite Morag's father's disquiet about this quickly arranged wedding, they had a grand time, and Rory's people all came over from Rathlin Island on their little boats, and they had a great party that lasted for 2 days and 2 nights, and they ceilidh and they danced and they drank and they told stories and sang songs. And just before Rory took Morag away across the sea to Rathlin Island, they went for one last walk along the western shore of Islay. And as they were walking along, Morag said to Rory, "Now that we're married, love, tell me, show me where we'll live." And he looked across the sea towards Rathlin, and he pointed and he said, "That's where we'll live." And as he looked across the sea to his native island, there was a nice gentle sea breeze coming across. But then in the distance they could see this swirling eddy of wind. And as it came across the sea towards them, it got bigger and more powerful, and it started to whip the waves up into white horses. And eventually it made landfall just where Rory and Morag were standing, and they could feel the cold air on their faces. They could feel the salt spray and taste it on their lips. And as it came closer, it grew more violent. It lifted pieces of driftwood off the beach and rocks and stones, and then suddenly Morag was hit on the head with something, and she fell down in a faint. And young Rory was lifted up by this wind, and he was thrown about like a rag doll. Well, Morag came to a few minutes later, and Rory was nowhere to be seen. But then she found him a few yards away, down near the water. He was senseless, and he had changed completely. The colour had drained from his cheeks. The spark had gone out of his eyes. And with the help of some island people, they got him carried home to Morag's house. And he had changed appearance completely. No longer was he with that young lad that Morag had been with just a few minutes before. He looked like an old, done man. His hair had turned white, his teeth were falling out. And everyone that saw him knew that Rory was lying on his deathbed. And later that night, he died. Well, as you can imagine, everyone was distraught. This was this beautiful young couple's wedding day, and no one more distraught than Morag. And of course, Rory's people were going back home to Rathlin anyway, so they took their son with them, and they buried him in the cemetery where all his people had been buried for generations. Morag couldn't go with them because in her confinement and her upset, she wanted to stay with her mother. And with everything that happened, she took to bed. She was so exhausted and so done in with grief. Well, she slept for quite a while, and then later that night she woke, and the house, the little cottage, was silent, and the fire was just glowing on the hearth. And as Morag lay there, young Rory came to her, as if in a dream. She pinched herself and said, "Rory, my love, is it you?" He said, "Of course it is. It is your one true love. But shh, listen to me. You must go to the wise woman. She will tell you what to do." But where? But before Morag could utter another word, Rory was gone. The next morning when her mother and father rose, Morag told her what she had seen and heard that night. And they said, "Morag, it's a dream. It's a dream. They have taken Rory back to Rathlin. He'll be in the ground by now. It's a dream. But Morag could not be settled. She insisted that they tell her where she would find the wise woman. And so the next day, that's where she went. And when she walked into the wise woman's cottage, she pushed the door open. And the wise woman said, Morag, come in till I see you. You'll be the one they say is young Rory from Rathlin's widow. And quick as a flash, Morag said, I am no widow. My husband is alive. I saw him last night. And she told the wise woman everything that had happened and what she had seen and heard the night before. And the wise woman asked her many strange questions. And then she said, your man is alive. He has been taken by the Lady of the Emerald Isle. Now, none of you here will know what the Lady of the Emerald Isle is, and neither did Morag. So the wise woman had to explain to her. And the Lady of the Emerald Isle, the wise woman said, is a wind. It's a swirling, twisting wind that travels over from Ireland to Scotland. And when you see that wind, you know it's the little people, the good folk, the fairies. They have been travelling back forward from Ireland to Scotland for centuries, sometimes to Cayley, sometimes to Quarrel. And when they travel in a band, they travel in that swirling wind. Your man is lucky that they didn't dump him in the sea, as they're often wont to do. They can lift the roof off cottages. They can lift animals into the air and fling them miles away. Here is what you must do. Have you a steady nerve and a strong heart? I will do whatever it takes, said Morag. Well then, heed me. Go to the exact place where your man was taken by the Lady of the Emerald Isle. Bring with you a sharp blade, a grass hook or a butcher's knife. Mind, it must be as sharp as a razor and made of steel. Wait until the wind comes towards you. No matter how fearsome it is, you must stand your ground. And at the last minute, throw that blade into the heart of that wind and say, this is for you, give me what is mine. Fail or falter in any particular, and you will never see your man again. Well, Morag went to the exact spot on the western shore of Islay the next day, and sure enough, didn't a swirling eddy of wind come across the sea. It was bigger and more violent than the one she had seen before. As it approached the beach, it lifted up pieces of driftwood and rocks. She could feel the cold air and taste the salt spray on her lips. And as it came closer, it was like the noise of a steam train. And at the last minute, Morag threw that blade into the middle of that wind, and she cried, this is for you, give me what is mine. And then the wind went over her like a steam train, knocked her to the ground. But from somewhere up in the middle of that tornado of wind dropped Rory, a bit dishevelled and shaken, but alive and hearty as he had ever been. And that young couple hugged and kissed and cried and laughed. And Morag said, I prayed, my love, that you would never be more than one night away from your bed. And your prayers have been answered, he said. You have saved my life. And they went home to Morag's parents' house. And if they Cayleyed for 2 days and 2 nights when they got married, they Cayleyed for a week at Rory's return, as people come over from Rathlin, and they drank, and they sang songs, and they told stories, and they danced. And you might be wondering, who or what was buried in that cemetery on Rathlin among Rory's people for all those generations? Well, with the permission of the parish priest, all that soil that was shovelled in so mournfully a couple of days earlier was dug out, And when they took out that thing wrapped in its burial shroud, they undid all the linen, and all it was a piece of old bog wood, no more and no less. And in time, Morag and Rory went into that grave, but not for many, many years, because they lived a long and happy life and they had many children. And over the years, Rory took Morag over the North Channel in a boat to see her people many, many times, but never, ever in the month of May, when the Lady of the Emerald Isle is most active. And that's my story.
Oh. Thank you, Colin. That's lovely.
Thank you,
Really
everyone.
lovely. Just what we wanted. Yeah, great. Now, I say this quite often, and I say it genuinely. People come in and they pop out again, and if you're on a time scale and I get to know about it, I am happy to try and sort of coordinate it. So Collins, he goes off to, I think you run a workshop for some other people, do you, at 8 o'clock, something along those lines. And he's still working away. He works all the time, that fellow does, he really does. So I'm going to go to Kath Edwards, who's pretty much the same. She's indicated to me she needs to go off at 8 o'clock. She's lovely to see you here, Kath. I'm going to ask you which part of the country you live in. Well, it's Much Wenlock. You've been there so often just recently. You're bound to have some accommodation there.
That's it, Mike. I'm moving in. It'll be a lot quicker just to move in.
Yeah.
Mike, tonight I've got excuse me, 3 things that are all linked together. There's a tune and a song and a story. Is that okay?
Absolutely. That is absolutely better. Yes,
good.
Lovely.
Okay, it takes about 10 minutes in total.
Oh, I think 9.5 would be enough.
Well, I'll do it quick then. I'll do it quick. I'll just start with a tune, folks. It should be okay because I've got original sound on, but well, give us a wave if it's not working. It was dawn, and it was the most glorious dawn. The sky a pale blue lit with golden light. The most glorious day for a battle. This army and this army, they were looking forward to the most glorious exchange between them because they were evenly matched. And so each army, each man was a worthy adversary for the other. And whoever at the end of the day was victorious, they would know it was a worthy and glorious victory. Each army waited. And then it began. The cavalry on each side wheeled around with their lances poised. The pikemen in the front charging at each other. The archers behind firing over the heads of their own foot soldiers. And swords drawn, men rushed at each other, and there was a clash of steel and screams and shouts. And the tragedy of that day And the tragedy of that battle was that each army was evenly matched, even to a man. And so they fought, and they fought, and they fought, and men died. And no one was victorious. Until at the end, there were just two men standing, one from this army and one from this. And they'd been fighting all day. The sun was sinking in the sky. And even though they were on opposing sides, they were, of course, brothers in arms. And so there was a sense of honour between them. And they agreed one with another that they should perhaps rest and tend their wounds before they fought on to see which side would be victorious. And they unbuckled their armour, and each man began to try to wash his own wounds. They found a few fallen water bottles on the field of battle, and you know, some wounds it's easier if your comrade washes them for you, and that's what they did for each other, and they bandaged each other. And then they sat down to talk. And this man, he talked about his family at home, his young wife and their little girl, and there's another one on the way, and how he really hoped to see them again. And this man talked about his family. He was still living with his parents, and his younger brother was his best friend in all of the world. And this man says, "So where is your younger brother? Is he at home with your parents?" And this man, he said nothing, but he just looked out onto the field of the fallen. And after a while they slept. And they awoke when it was almost dawn. The sky was beginning to turn grey. And they looked at each other and they began to replace their armour. And you know, it's said that once you know someone's story, you can't hate them. But of course they were soldiers. They were not under orders to hate. They were just under orders to fight and to kill. And so they continued putting on their armour and they drew their swords. And one of the men, it might have been this one, it might have been that one, they said, "Why don't we just walk up the hill there and watch the sunrise before we fight?" And they did. Side by side, shoulder to shoulder, each man matching the other's pace, they walked up the hill until they crested the rise, and there, bathed in golden light, in the beauty of dawn, the land was laid out before them. And a breeze sprang up, and it was fresh, and it carried the sweetness of the smell of blossom on it, and it whirled around them, and it seemed to wash away the previous day. And without another word, each man nodded to the other, and this man walked away that way, and this man walked away that way. This morning early I walked on, while my darling was in a dream. The last sweet days of summer bloomed and dressed the trees in green. Then soaring high in the gleaming sky, from far across the bay, came a fearsome roar from a distant shore at the dawning of the day. Then I called my men to follow me, knowing well that the view was dim. Though tired and worn, how they fought all morn, as time was closing in. And my heart was sad, though sore with pride, for brave lads all were they. As the angels fly, how they climb so high on the dawning of the day. The edge is moving nearer now inside the fading sun. And calling, calling out to them, my brothers, one by one. But only dust and silent sounds, the ashes float away. As the twilight ends and the night descends till the dawning of the day. Forgive me, love, I am going now, so very far away. When darkness falls, only think me near, and do not be afraid. And please don't grieve when I am gone. Abide in what remains, till the shadows end and we meet again on the dawning of the day. For when shadows end, we shall meet again on the dawning of the day. Thank you. I think I've got some competition there, haven't I?
Kamal, could you mute in the cafe?
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Could you mute yourself?
Okay, I don't know. Yeah, okay.
Yes, thanks.
Kath, I've just sent you a message. I told that story, a different version of it, at a pub on Wednesday night. I've put in the chat.
Oh, wow.
But I just wanted to say quickly, it was quite an experience for me because it's the first time I've told live for 3 years, and it was a pub full of men who never had heard the story before. But it went down very well. But you singing that song just clinched it. Bravo. It was fabulous.
Thank
Absolutely
you very much,
fabulous.
Rona. Thank you.
Kath,
You lulled me into a state where I forgot about the heat. We're having a heat wave here.
Oh,
and I want to thank you, because for a moment there was no heat. There was only the enchantment of your voice.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And apologies that I've got to go at 8. I've got some MCs to organise.
Yeah, Kath, you're like a good red wine. The older you get, the better you are.
Oh, piss off, Mike.
Right, we're going to go to John Rowe. Now then, John, who are you?
Who are
you? Yeah.
I'm a geezer, and I'm a geezer, and I'm in Swindon at the moment. The other week, I think the last one I was probably with Kamal in the cafe, but who I'm still asking to mute. Kamal might want to tell a story later, or a poem. But right now, I shall do a few poems. Say They'll only take 5 hours. I mean 5 minutes. And
no, that's okay. Can I just remind everybody to mute before he goes? And the cafe while we're performing, can you mute? Otherwise, we get background stuff. Okay.
Come on, we can hear everything in the cafe. Could you mute the cafe?
Yeah, I did it. Yeah.
But it's
no, you're not muted.
You're not muted at the moment.
No.
Okay, I'll start. I'll rely on you. Anyway, this is Against the Grain, and it's sort of memories of my dad a bit.
All right.
As a boy, I walked round the edge of fields so as not to trample the crop, or later in the year to avoid going against the grain, breaking stems, making them impossible to harvest. My father taught me this, as well as how to climb gates on the hinge side, avoiding too much strain, or closing them behind me to keep in the livestock, and to put our golden Labrador Skipper on the lead as we walked the towpath beside water meadows where cattle graze to avoid worrying them. He showed me how to take an ear of wheat, rub it between my palms and blow away the chaff, leaving a tasty morsel of grain, and how to cut a stick into a crook for pulling down brambles where the fattest blackberries grew. He taught me much, but now there is no space to walk round the wheat, and rewilding has become the field of the conscious, going against the grain, not the natural order of life. And this is Through Tears. Camel, you're still not muted. That's all right. I'll go to the next one. But you should have a little... That's it. You've done it. Fantastic. Marvellous. This is Through Tears. Through Tears, I watched the celebration of ignorance stoked by newspaper headlines, turning the tide against those drowning at sea as they flee countries drowning in floods of tears. Through tears, I grieve the shattering of dreams. Through tears, I look at what could have been, the sharing of the spoils of the earth while not spoiling the earth, communities shaping their own destiny for the benefit of all, stepping lightly away from fear or favour towards a utopian vision. History's excrement, division, imprisoned in old school textbooks. Through tears of joy, I watch and listen to another generation cutting a path through the mistakes of their elders, with a sense of urgency not seen since a world war bequeathed us a nuclear future and the possibility of extinction. Through tears of gratitude, I see these fledgling fighters battle to keep back the flames. I don't know how. I better explain to Babasi what snowflake is used for as an insult. Snowflake is used as an insult for those liberal lefty softies who who think things like Black Lives Matter matters. And
it's an insult in the States as well.
Oh well, this is called proud to be a snowflake. Proud to be a snowflake, unique, an intricate part of the whole, forever changing. I'm reborn over and over. Tread on me and I'll stick to the sole of your boot and become a puddle inside your house. Sweep me and my friends away, and my ally, and my close ally, the wind, will pile us up further down the road. Attack us with heat and we'll rise up and wait for months to fall on you. I'm proud to be a snowflake, knowing people dream of me coming like Papa Noel at Christmas. Ironic, isn't it, that pale supremacists fling it at us as an insult.
Yes,
Thank you.
John, lovely. You know, you have a depth in your poetry sometimes, John, that touches me.
Thank you.
Right, so I'm going to go to B. Ferguson next, but after that's Keith from Lincolnshire, then Chandrika. If you could go after Keith, and then Baba. After that it'll be Donald, and then Mona, and we'll see where we are from that point on. So that's going to be the batting order for the rest of the evening. I'll shout it out as you go, so don't panic. And if I've missed anybody out, I'm going to sit here So everybody's got a chance to tell a story or to do a poem or whatever we do, so don't worry about it. So B, I believe you come from Edinburgh.
I do indeed, yes. Yes, and I keep seeing all these messages about heat waves. It's freezing in Edinburgh. Got my big thick jumper on here.
Well, I was
Anyway,
north of the border.
I thought I would like to tell you. Sorry?
Kath and I were both north of the border just recently at a place called Kippen.
Oh, yeah.
A couple of weeks or so ago, and we had a lovely weekend. It was really warm and the sun was out, and it was great. It really was. So
well, that was it then. That was the Scottish summer, probably. You know. It's raining as well at the moment, pouring down out there. So yes, so
I've been up to Scotland a few times over the years. Amy Douglas and I came up to the Scottish Storytelling Centre, their celebration of Duncan Williamson about 10 years ago, just before the pandemic.
Oh yeah,
And,
it's a great place.
Yeah, it is. It's a fantastic place full of fantastic people. That's the definition of Edinburgh. Apart from the fact, the other definition of Scotland's about 5 million alcoholics sat on the mountain.
Well, yes. I wish I was. I'm waiting for a hip operation at the moment, so if I put my camera off and disappear, it's because I've got to walk about, because I can't sit for too long. So I can't drink because I'm on all these wretched painkillers. So.
Oh right. Well, just put them in a pile. I'll come up and help you when I get out.
Right. I'm piling them up when it's all over, you know. So.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so you're going to tell us a story tonight?
Yeah. I thought I'd tell you one of my favourite Scottish stories, which comes from up in the north, the Highlands, and Colin told us that beautiful story about the supernatural world, the other world, and this is the same. It's about the other world because, you see, up in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, a few hundred years ago anyway, people believed that the other world existed just as much as our own did, and they worked together. And very often, you know, men would marry a fairy wife or vice versa. It was just an accepted part of life, as were fairy dogs. And these fairy dogs really existed. They were seen many, many times until about 200 years ago, and there haven't been any sightings since, so they've maybe gone extinct, which would be very sad. But they were large and green, and they had fiery red eyes and golden ears. And the thing about a fairy dog was they weren't really to be feared, but if you happened to see one and it barked 3 times, then that would signify your death. Now, if you were brave enough to throw something at it after the first bark, it would disappear and you would live. But your luck would change. You would have bad luck from then on. Well, the last sighting of a fairy dog was seen up round about the village of Kinusi, which is up in the Highlands at the base of the Monoliath Mountains. And this is a story that comes from that very village, where in a lonely cottage in the base of the hills there was a shepherd, an old man, and he lived all alone in this cottage with his dog, his collie dog, his only companion. And one night, terrible night it was, the wind was howling and the rain was pouring down, and the old man was sitting at a table and he was making a new handle for his crook. He sat there carving away, and his dog was outside rounding up the last of the sheep. And suddenly there was a scratching at the door, and he went to the door and he opened it, and nothing came in except wind. And he said, "Come on, in! I can't stand here all night holding the door open for you. It's cold, come on in." And in walked not his own collie dog, but a large green fairy dog. It had bright red eyes, golden ears, and it walked over towards the hearth and it lay down in front of the fire. Now, it didn't bark, but, well, wasn't the kind of thing that, you know, you want to have in your own cottage when you're all alone. But after all, it was his guest. He had said, "Come in." And So he sat down at the table and he looked at the dog. And then he thought, well, maybe the thing looked a bit hungry and cold. So he went over and he got some food and some water fresh from the burn, and he put them down in front of the dog. It didn't touch the food, but it lapped up that water, all of it. And then there was another scratching at the door. This time it was his own dog. The dog came in. As soon as it saw the fairy dog, wow, it was down on its haunches, and one of those awful noises, halfway between a bark and a growl, came from its throat. It was terrified. The fairy dog just turned round and looked, and then moved aside to make room for the dog. And the dog crawled up and lay down in front of the fire. And that was how they all stayed that night, because, well, somehow the old man didn't feel he could actually go to bed. It didn't feel right with a fairy dog in the house. So they sat there all night. And at first light, that big green fairy dog, it got up and it went to the door. The old man rushed and he opened the door to let it out. But before it went, with a tongue as soft and as pink as a rose petal, it licked that old man's hand. And then it left. Well, months went by and the year went on, and it got towards winter. And one day he was out with the dog out in the hills, and the dog slipped on an icy slope, and it caught its paw in between some rocks, and it was crushed. And the old man lifted the dog and he carried it home carefully and put it down beside the fire and bandaged up that paw with birch leaves. That night it snowed, and it snowed like it can only snow in those high hills. And he knew that in the morning he had to go out and look for those sheep. His sheep would be buried under drifts of snow. And so at first light he got up and he took his crook, and the dog, well, it tried to stand, but it couldn't. It just whimpered and lay back down again. And the old man said, "Oh, bide there, you're no use to be in that state." But he knew that he was no use to himself either, just him without the dog. All day he searched for those sheep. He got more and more exhausted. He found a couple, but he thought he'd lost the lot. But suddenly there was a gust of wind and a flurry of snow, and out of that wind jumped that large green fairy dog. And it came up to the old man and he said, "Oh, I know I'm dying. I just want to lie here and go to sleep," he said. "But I know you don't need to bark. I know I'm going." But the dog didn't bark. It walked up to the old man, and with a tongue as pink and as soft as a rose petal, it licked his hand. And that man suddenly was filled with energy and youth, and he just felt as if he could walk to the ends of the earth. And he got up and he started to look for those sheep. The dog, it lifted up its head, it opened its mouth, and it howled up to the sky. And suddenly there were hundreds of fairy dogs, and they all appeared, and they were rushing up and down the hillside like owls looking for prey. And the old man, well, all he had to do was wait until the fairy dogs found one of the sheep buried, and then they would stay there until he went and dug it out. And it seemed like no time at all before he was taken by the big fairy dog round to a wee corrie where there was a wall and shelter, and there were all his sheep, grazing peacefully, being looked after by an army of green fairy dogs. And then it was next to no time again before he found himself outside his own cottage. He turned to thank the dog, and he put out his head to pat its head, put out his hand to pat its head, but there was nothing there, just wind and snow and the whining of his own dog inside his own cottage. That's me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Pete. That's lovely. Thank you very much. There's a small piece of woodland. It's between two rivers, B. One's the River Wye and one's the River Severn. It's called the Forest of Dean. It's about 200 square miles of forest. And it's been there since the Romans were there. But around the time of the Normans, they started doing maps to it. And in the middle of the forest, they've just got a round circle where they didn't write anything at all. It's just blank. And that went on for 200 or 300 years, because that was the place where this world met the other world. And you could go into the fairyland and you could come back to this land and pass through. And the Normans who studied those maps and did all the work on them and put them and wrote them down, they always believed that if you walk into the Forest of Dean, you could walk out into the fairyland. If you're in the fairyland, you could walk back into our land if you're in the forest.
Well, when you go to Iceland, it's the same. They have rocks actually in the middle of the road that they left, even though they've constructed roads. And they're where the fairy folk live. Quite the active.
Is that you, Valentina?
It is me. Yep.
Yes, I can't see you. That's all.
Oh, well, I'll have to try and fix that after I stop talking. But yeah. happy Victoria Day from Canada.
A happy Victoria Day to you. It was lovely to hear your voice again. So thank you very much, P. That was a lovely, and I hope you'll come and visit us again sometime. We do this every other Sunday at 7 o'clock in the evening, and all we do is what you see. Okay?
Right. I'd love to. Thank you. Thank you for
that.
You're
very welcome. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Right. So I'm going to go to Keith, then Chandrika, then Baba. Okay. And then we're onwards. And Donald, do you say you're from Loch Lomond? Is that where you are now?
Yes, place called Balloch, and right at the bottom of Loch Lomond. Yes.
Right. Okay. I look forward to catching up with you later. Right. Okay. So Keith from Lincolnshire.
Hello, everybody. Like many of you, you must have told stories to different sizes of groups. I've told stories to sort of from say 30 to 50, sometimes 60 more. But one of the storytelling sessions I remember the most was at Alford in Lincolnshire, WI. And there was 8 ladies there. And in my introduction, I said that I told children's stories. Oh, he tells children's stories, do you? Yes, but you've got to join in. And so I told this story, and it was so lovely to see these ladies, many of them in their 60s and 70s, and they were 7 years old again. New life for them. They really enjoyed it, and so did I. And even though I've spoken to sort of a large numbers of people, that session with just those few ladies sticks in my mind more than anything else. And this is good practice because in a couple of weeks' time, I've got a big project with some local schools. And also it fits in with what's been mentioned already about fairies. Now, you all know about fairies. And there's 2 things about fairies you need to remember. First of all, they love cake. They just love cake, but chocolate cake, sponge cake, toffee cake, any kinds of cake that was topped with cherries. They just love cake. But the other thing about fairies is that they hate noise. And that's why we don't see many of them these days, because there's just so much noise. There's traffic noise, there's wherever you go, there's a radio playing, there's a television going, there's people shouting. There's all kinds of noise wherever you go. You go into a supermarket and they're playing what I think is called music, but sometimes it's more like noise as far as I'm concerned. And that is why we don't see many fairies these days, because in the modern world, there's just so much noise. Now, this is a story about Annie. And apparently she's from Scotland, so B and Rona might know this story. And she was a very, very clever and good baker. She could make all kinds of cakes, all kinds of buns, all kinds of chocolate cake and strawberry cake and lots and lots and lots of different cakes. And the thing is, the problem was with these cakes was that they were just simply too good. Because people would have them on their plate, they'd sit down at the table and they would eat their cake, and then there's some crumbs on the plate, and they would pick those crumbs up, and then any crumbs that fell on the table, that they would pick that up as well. And even they might even step down or lean down and pick any crumbs off the floor. And so there was no crumbs, no cake for any of the fairies. And so the fairies and the king of the fairies was very upset about this and decided to do something about it. Now, on a Monday, Annie would bake lots and lots of cakes and scones and things and put it in a basket, and she'd go up the lane to the local market to sell them. And so one Tuesday morning, the king of the fairies, with his entourage, with some people in his court, they hid behind a bush on the lane that Annie was walking along. And they sprang out and threw fairy dust into her eyes. And she became very drowsy, and she sat down on a seat and she wavered a bit and she fell asleep. And the fairies, they just grabbed hold of her and whisked her off to fairyland. And when she awoke, the king of the fairies said, "Now, you will make cake for us every day forever." And Annie was very, very frightened about this, being stuck in fairyland forever. And she's a bit frightened, and what should she do? But she knew that fairies didn't like noise. And so she devised a plan. And she said to the king of the fairies, and the fairies said, "Well, if you want me to make some cakes, then I must have some ingredients. I must have some flour and some butter and some milk and some baking powder and everything that's needed for cakes. Can you bring me some?" Well, they looked around fairyland, and of course there's none anywhere. No, certainly not of any significant quantity. And so Annie said, "Well, there's lots and lots of the ingredients that we need in my kitchen in the cupboards. So can you fetch me some?" And so the king of the fairies agreed, and he had all his servants, they whizzed off to Annie's kitchen. And out of the cupboard, they brought all the ingredients for all the cakes that she needed. All the butter and the flour and the sugar and the baking powder and the eggs and everything. And they whizzed back to Annie and brought them to Annie. And Annie said, "Oh, that's great. That's all the ingredients, but I need something to mix them in. Can you bring me a bowl and a spoon or something to mix them in?" And they hunted around fairyland, and all they could find was a bowl as big as an egg cup and a little tiny stick. She said, "That's no good. But in my kitchen, there is a wooden bowl and a wooden spoon that I use for mixing. Can you fetch them for me?" And so the king agreed. And so the fairies, they whizzed off to Annie's kitchen, and they found the bowl, and then together they lifted it up with a spoon, and they whizzed back to fairyland to Annie. And Annie put all the ingredients into the bowl, and she started to mix. Clackety, 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 clack. Clackety, 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 clack. "Oh, stop, said the king. No. That's too noisy. No. And Annie said, "Well, if you fetch my pussycat, then I can maybe mix a little bit quieter, and we can mix some cake using with the cat there, with it just sort of calming me down." And the king agreed. And so the fairies, they whizzed off to her kitchen, to her cottage, picked it up, the cat, the pussycat, that was asleep and whizzed it back. And she started to mix again. Clackety, 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 clack. Clackety, 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 clack. And she put her foot on the cat's tail. Meow, meow, meow. Oh, no, no, says the king. I can't stand this noise. And he said, well, perhaps that we'd get on better if I had my dog with me, because then we could all be a bit quiet, and the dog could then just sort of soothe me as I mix the ingredients. And the king agreed. And so the fairies, they whizzed off to Annie's cottage, and they picked up the brown Labrador dog and brought it back, whizzed back. And Annie started to mix again. Clackety, 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 clack. She put her foot on the cat's tail. Meow, meow, meow. Under the dog's tail. Woof, 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 woof. Oh, I can't stand this, can't stand this, said the king. Oh. Well, and he said, well, perhaps I'd be gotten better if I had my baby with me, my young daughter in a cradle, and she must be getting very hungry by now, and perhaps that would calm me down. I'd be able to mix a bit more quieter, and we'll be able to have some cake. Agreed, said the king. And so the fairies are whizzed off to the cottage, and the baby was asleep in the cradle, picked up the baby and whizzed it back. And Annie started to mix again. Clackety, 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 clack. Meow, 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 meow. Woof, woof, woof. Wow, 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 wow. I can't stand this, says the king. I can't stand this. You go take your mixing bowl, your cat and your dog and your baby, and go back to your cottage. And they whizzed her back to her cottage. Now, Annie was very pleased to be back home in her kitchen, and she was able to continue to bake cakes. And she baked all her cakes ready for market on the Tuesday, on the Monday, but she also made a small cake. And as she went to market along the lane, she took out from her basket this small cake and put it beside the fairy mound and went off to market to sell her produce. And when she came back, there beside the fairy mound was a little bag of gold. The fairies were saying, thank you. Thank you so much for that cake. And that cake, as you know, is called a fairy cake.
Right, that's lovely. Right, so what I'm going to do tonight, I know it's a bit of a change, it's 8:10. I'm going to call it 5 minutes so everybody can have a comfort break. I've been asked quietly behind the scenes to do this, so I'm going to disappear now for 5 minutes and come back. So by my clock, it's 8:10. We'll start again at 8:15. Don't worry about timing. We just finish when everybody's done. So there's plenty of time. No one's going to be worried about cutting your stories down or anything else. So I'm just going to call it for 5 minutes to give everybody a chance to stretch.
Great story, Keith. That's a new one on me.
Gosh, is it really?
Apparently it's from Scotland.
You don't know that one? I've been telling that one for years. It's a great story.
Yeah, it's
it's fabulous for kids because the kids join in.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do they? And, yeah.
I do something similar called the birthday cake.
Yeah.
It's not that similar. It's just about a cake.
Yeah, it was so wonderful.
A couple of fairies in it.
It's so wonderful, this WI, because I had these ladies 60 and 70 being 7 again, and they just loved it. They had them all joining in. It was brilliant.
Yeah. I know the story, but I've never told it. But I might just John next month.
Any stories about food, and you got me.
Well, I've never heard that one before, so it's one I wouldn't mind learning, but it's just fun. You know, you can, I can see how people would enjoy that, right?
Yeah.
And in the like right now around here, a lot of people like to do interactive stories. So whether it's kids or adults, you can encourage that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, that reminded me. I did my second live in-person performance since returning from Marrakesh yesterday, Saturday, at a library, at a public library. and it was fun. It was I met some very interesting people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rona, thank you for your concerns and your comments. I really, truly appreciated that.
You're very welcome, my dear. I'm a typical mother and grandmother.
Oh, I understand, because I'm a Baba and a Booba. That's father and a grandfather.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I've had the grandkids here today as well with us.
So
right.
I sent you a wee message, Mike. I don't know if you got it, saying how much I miss the confabs.
Yes.
Was that? Oh, that was okay.
It's just awful. I mean, when you've had something every year that you look forward to for the last 15 years or whatever it was that I've been going, it was my kind of look forward to, you know, to just get a week away to myself. And I really miss them. But I hope we'll do something this year.
Well, the confabs, for those people who don't know, there's an organisation called the MAGS, which is to do with the southwest of England. So that's Bristol and Swindon that goes down to Cornwall. And it's run by a lady down there called Wendy Dacre. And she used to have a gathering every weekend, once a weekend in the middle of January. We had to go to the top of Dartmoor, where they have proper weather is what they used to say, in the top of Dartmoor. So I don't know what weather you have in the Highlands, Colin, but at the top of Dartmoor in January, it's proper weather, is what they used to call it.
I used to go for the whole week. Maybe about 8 of us would go for the whole week, including Wendy and Fiona and Ed and them. Yeah. And we actually got snowed in one week, and I tell you, it was one of the best weeks of my life. I had such fun sledging and all the rest of it with Sharon Jacksy's. Oh my God, that was such a great week. It was just get away from it all, you know, and it's just I miss it quite a lot.
So I'm just going to do a couple of parish notices and we'll get started again. So for those that have been here on a regular basis, Keith, for instance, Despina, who was here a moment ago, and Rona yourself, I think. We're talking to the World Storytelling Cafe about doing this live in Marrakesh. So one Sunday in November. Now, the big festival is going to be in February. And that's fine. They're all the great and the good and the famous people, they're all going to go to Marrakesh. All right. So I was thinking that I would try and get there in the November, just do this. And it's not a festival, it's a story round, but we do it live. And perhaps a few of us could try to get there. And so I'm not doing anything now myself much until after our festival. Our festival is the 8th, 9th and 10th of July. We're about 7 weeks out at the moment. And you can imagine how much work it all runs to take a festival through for the first time in particular. So just keep those dates in your diary. And we're talking to Mike and John at World Storytelling Cafe, and that's what we're thinking of doing. I hope you've all heard about our festival so far. It's Get a Word in Edgeways is what we're calling it. And Chandrika, I think you're probably one of our artists, aren't you? Now, Chandrika has been up in Much Wenlock with us, and I have a lovely photograph of her standing with the mayor of Much Wenlock, and the chains he was wearing were about 1,000 years old. I don't suppose he told you that, did he? And we had a lovely day, and you told stories in the green with the vicar and the Salvation Army and everything. So that's what we're getting up to. So I'm going to go, but has anybody got any particular parish notices that they want to say? Are they performing in any way? John, do you want to say something about the World Storytelling? Baba?
Yeah, we have it's not 50 years old, but we have a local celebration that we do that was interrupted by COVID-19. It's called Watermelon Day DC / Baba C's birthday celebration. And it's held outdoors at a place called Sankofa Cafe. Sankofa means to look back, to move forward. And it's always it's an inclusive, intergenerational gathering. And we have people of all ages. We have musicians and spoken word artists. We have DC's foremost griot and master storyteller telling stories. And I've been very fortunate for the last, since I've been involved with it, almost every act finds some way of bringing up my birthday. So I really appreciate it. So I'm sharing that not just because it's my birthday celebration, but it's a big community celebration. And the other thing is it talks about how watermelon got to be a negative stereotype regarding African Americans. It was not always that. It was a deliberate ploy, but we can talk about that another time.
We'll talk about that another
Can
time.
you say the name of it again, please?
Yes, it's called Watermelon Day DC and Baba C's birthday celebration.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, right. So that's in one of the states.
That's in August.
America.
That's in August. Yes, in America.
So
see, there's a national watermelon day, but we have a DC watermelon day as well.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so anybody in the Highlands of Scotland, they're growing watermelons. Okay.
Well, down in Chippenham this weekend, which is not a million miles from you, and Mike used to, I think, there's the folk festival this weekend coming.
Yeah.
It's run throughout the town this weekend. Taffy Thomas is coming down. I shall be there. But at the cafe, we have on we've got on Tuesday, we have our International Young Tellers. And on Friday, we have the amazing Despina. And Baba C, I might want you to introduce Despina because I might well be performing at Chippenham at that time.
No, I can do that for you. I'll happily do that for you. And I think you need to start talking to B. Ferguson about doing some stuff on the World Storytelling Cafe, mate.
I think so.
I think so, yeah. Her rates are really, really cheap. Okay.
Right, yeah. Okay. But how much are you going to pay me then?
Well, no, nectar points. I've got some nectar points.
I accept nectar points. Old bus tickets, anything.
Yeah. Right, so we're going to get started to it. So we've got Chandrika, then Baba, then Donald, and then Rona, and then we'll see where we are. Okay, so Chandrika is from South Wales. She's a Hindu priestess, as well as many other things in life. She's been up with us telling stories up here on the Welsh Marsh, and we had a lovely day as we came out of the board. We came out of the COVID, and you were talking about doing a live gig. It's the first live gig I'd done in a couple of years. There's all these kids there who had sort of autism and everything else, and I was terrible. I just hadn't practiced, 2 years. I sat down and went, what am I supposed to do? But Chandrika took me through it. She was absolutely great. So thank you very much for that, Chandrika. And so over to you.
Okay. Ganganapataye namo nama, Siddhi Vinayaka namo nama, Ashta Vinayaka namo nama, Ganpati Bappa Moria. Ganganapataye namo nama, Siddhi Vinayaka namo nama, Ashta Vinayaka namo nama, Ganpati Bappa Moria. A long, long time ago, Shiva, the spirit of the universe, the god of dissolution, lived with his consort Parvati, the earth goddess, on Mount Kailash. Parvati was on Kailash all the time. She was the daughter of the Himalaya. But Shiva, the spirit, would come and go. He would stay with her for a short while, and then he would disappear and merge into the universe. And one day when Shiva had returned and Parvati and Shiva were together, Parvati said to Shiva, I want a child of my own. Shiva smiled and said, you are the earth goddess. You can have your own children. And Parvati said, well, I can. I will create my own children. It's just that you only live in now, which means you forget what's happened yesterday and you don't think about what's going to happen in the future. So I don't want you to come one of the days and find that we have children? Shiva smiled and said, I'll bear it in mind. So the next time Shiva was away, Parvati decided to create her own child. She sat in her bathroom on the floor. She had 52 varieties of sandalwood pastes. And she took the sandalwood paste and rubbed it all over the right side of her body. And then with the sandalwood paste and part of her skin, she molded a little boy. Light skin, dark eyes, dark hair. And then she blew some air into his mouth. And he opened his eyes and he said, Ma. And she said, yes, I am your mother. I am going to call you Ganesh. And she lifted him up, and he was 5-6-year-old child, almost. And she said, Ganesh, play outside while I have my bath. And as she watched Ganesh walking past, she thought, my son is going to be alone. He's going to be an only child. I want him to have a sibling. So she sat back down, she took the sandalwood paste, she rubbed it all on the left side of her body. And with the sandalwood paste and part of her skin, she molded a little girl. Dark skin, light eyes, long dark hair. She blew air into her mouth and she opened her eyes, the little girl, and said, Ma. She said, Oka, I will call you Usha, Dawn. You are going to be my daughter. And then she lifted her, put her down, and said, go and play with your brother. But make sure both of you do not let anyone in. I am going to have a bath now. So the kids ran away, closed the door behind, and sat outside playing. And they'd been playing, must be only 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Then they looked up at the sky, and the sky was changing. And the sky became gray and dark. And suddenly there was a noise, and there he was standing in front of them, this giant figure, this giant man. And they looked at him, and there he was, 4 arms, long hair, matted hair, tied in a knot, snake around his neck, 3 eyes. It was no other than Shiva. Shiva saw these little children playing there. He didn't take any notice. He just moved forward, trying to get inside the house. When the little boy, Ganesh, stepped forward and pushed. You may not enter. My mother is having a bath. You have to stay out and wait. Shiva looked at the little boy in amusement to start with. Who are you? I am Ganesh. Out of my way, said Shiva, out of my way, and start to get in again. And Ganesh pushed him back. Shiva was not going to take that. He was the Lord of the universe. This little pipsqueak is going to push me around? No way. So Shiva pushed Ganesh, and then Ganesh pushed Shiva back, and soon they started fighting. And Shiva lost his temper. And as he lost his temper, he took his trident, lifted it, and went, and the trident decapitated Ganesh's head. The head rolled down on the floor. The blood splattered everywhere. And before Shiva could even enter inside the house, Parvati had heard a noise. She was already dressed and she ran outside. And when she ran outside, there she saw the rolling head of her son. She picked up the head. She couldn't say anything. She picked up the body and put it on her lap. And soon she started crying. She couldn't stop the tears. Shiva eka putra vinani remaya ena ratri divasa kema jaya ganapati bolo nebada. Parvati wept, asking Ganesh to wake up. But of course, Ganesh couldn't.
No.
And then Shiva realized that he had just decapitated his son. It all came to him. And he sat on the floor as Parvati wept. And Shiva unmatted his hair, and as the hair flew down on the floor, little creepy crawly beings started coming down. And Shiva instructed them to say, go and get me a head of a being. So they went out and they brought back an elephant's head. And Shiva took the head and put it on Ganesh's body. And the little boy with the elephant head opened his eyes and wiggled his nose and giggled. Parvati was not laughing. There he was, a beautiful little son she had, and now look at him. His nose is too big, his ears are too big, little mouth, little eyes. She was not happy. And then Shiva said, Parvati, why are you not happy? Your son is alive. And Parvati said, who is going to worship him? Look what he looks like. He doesn't look like any humans. And Shiva said, Parvati, can you see what he has? You see, he has little eyes, and that means he can see everything. He has big ears, and that means he hears everyone's problems. He has a long nose. He can smell problems and trouble everywhere. Has a little mouth. He doesn't speak a lot. And whatever he has heard, he keeps it all in his big belly. That is the God of wisdom. And he will be the first one to be worshipped forever. Ganganapataye namo nama, Siddhi Vinayaka namo nama, Ashta Vinayaka namo nama, Ganpati Bappa Moria. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chandrika. And I'm pleased we booked you at our festival. It just proves to go we get something right sometimes.
Thank you.
It's going to be lovely to have you. John Rowe, can you please mute? Right, Baba, you can unmute.
Okay.
Here we go.
Do you hear a loud noise in the background from my side besides me?
No.
Okay, great. As I shared earlier, we're having a sort of heat wave in the DMV. That's short for District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. And where I am, the AC is malfunctioning. So sometimes it gets.
So what temperature is it?
Well, where I am, it's in the room I'm in, it's in the 90s.
That's not hot.
Oh, it is. It is for us. It's in the 90s. It's just short of heat advisement, and I have asthma, so I have to be very, very careful. But I have these fans blowing.
That happens in England every summer.
Great.
It gets that hot every summer. What's the matter? Yeah.
You know. So anyhow, I just want to make sure that the fan was not distracting.
No.
So I have a story I want to share. It's an original story, and I'm reclaiming stories that I wrote back in 19 and reassembling them. So this story is too new to have been told a long time ago, but it's too old to say it's new. And this is a story about a magical family. Now, everyone in this family had at least 2 gifts. The father's name was Chef. The father's name was Chef. And they called him Chef because, well, the man could cook. Not only could he cook, while most people have to carry out pots and pans and worry about stoves and flames, not Chef. Chef merely had to visualize what the meal he wanted to fix. Sometimes he would go out and get ingredients so he could concentrate on what they look like. And Chef, his magic would make a feast appear. And it didn't matter how many guests you had, they all got their ample full and then some. Now, his wife was known as Maker. She was an architect. She was a builder. And once again, she could draw out when people hired her, she would draw out the images of what they wanted, and she could look at it, and her magic was whatever she could envision, whatever she could draw, came into being. Some people hired her to make compounds that had like castle-like structures. Other people hired her to make compounds where the family, well, the main family lived there, the in-laws lived there, and the children lived there. Chef and Maker were very popular, and they were always traveling. Now, they had twin sons. Now, the names of these family and children don't translate well, but the sons' names, if you translate into English, one was called Echo and the other was called Repeat. And their gift was whatever one heard, the other could repeat. And whatever one repeated, the other one could hear. And when they put their minds together, they could make whatever they heard be heard by others. And this is the way that Chef and Maker would keep tabs on their children at home when they were away. Now, there were other children, but that's for another story, except for 2. There was a son called Winget's son, and they called him Winget's son because he could make wings appear on his back, and he could fly and soar with the best of birds. I mean, he was brilliant, but he had another gift, and he had the gift of guile. He could convince anyone and everyone that whatever he said was true, even his parents. So some people who really knew him called him Wicket's son. And he had a younger sister named Crystal. Crystal. Crystal would sit down by the riverbanks or sometimes just in the cool shade of a tree, and she could take clay and make crystal figurines from them. She could make glass bowls and chalices and jewelry from clay. She also had another gift which came in handy because you see, Wicket's son, or Winget's son, was very jealous of his sister because everyone was always praising her creations. He could not stand that. He wanted them to praise him. But how do you praise someone for being able to convince everybody that even your lies were true? So Wicket's son would find out her creations and he would break them. And then when Crystal would tell her parents, he would say, "Oh, mom, mother, father, why would I break up my beloved sister's creations?" No. See, what happened was she was trying to bring them home and she was carrying too much and she must have tripped and broken them herself. I would never do such a thing. And of course, the parents believed him. And this went on and on and on. But no matter how wicked he was, no matter how much he tormented her, she would always find solace in making things, in shaping things, in creating things. Well, one day, Winget's son found her latest catch of creations and destroyed everything but one bowl. And then he started taunting her from the air and chasing her. And she realized that he was angrier and more incensed than he had ever been before. And she began to run. But he could fly. And just before he could catch her, she dove into the water, where her second gift came in. For she could take the form of anything that lived under the sea, anything that lived in the river or body of water. And Winget's son would get angry because how dare she get away from me like that? And then he remembered it was said that a magical creature named Uru, U-R-U, Uru, lived deeper in the forest under a baobab tree. The baobab tree was the oldest thing in the forest, and it was rumored that Uru was older than the baobab tree. And it was said that if you petition Uru, he could grant you a wish. He could grant you powers. So Winget's son flew as rapidly as he could, and he flew all the way until he found Uru sitting under the baobab tree. Now, Uru looked like many different things to many different people, but as old as he was, to those that had less than the truth on their tongues, he appeared to be a child. Sometimes 9, sometimes 11, sometimes as old as 13, but he always appeared as a child. Of course, Winget's son did not know this. And Winget's son landed in front of Uru, and he brought him a gift. He may have been wicked, but he wasn't stupid. And he offered Uru a gift of sweet fruits, all kinds of fruits, and Uru accepted them. And then he told Uru about his evil, wicked sister that was always getting him in trouble, telling lies on him to his parents, getting him punished for things he did not do. And he wanted to get her punished for these things. And Uru said, if what you're telling me is true, I can give you the power to punish her. But if what you're telling me is not true, my gift will punish you. What are you willing to trade for my gift? And Winget's son said, I don't know. What do you want? She must be punished. Uru said, I have a brother who would like to know how it feels to fly, for he has never flown before. I tell you what, you loan my brother your wings, and I will give you the power to punish your wicked sister, if what you tell me is true. But beware, as I told you, if you're lying to me, my gift will punish you. Well, Winget's son wasn't worried. I mean, he had the gift. He could convince anybody that the words from his mouth were true. Or so he thought. He said, okay. This I will do. And so Uru clapped his hands twice, and another child appeared next to him. This is my brother. Give him your wings. And the wings disappeared from Winget's son's back and appeared on the back of Uru's brother. He says, now I'm going to give you the gift to punish your wicked sister. And Winget's son says, I feel different, but without my wings, how will I get back home to punish my sister? My brother will take you there. And so Uru's brother lifted Winget's son and flew him back to where he lived. Well, while Winget's son was gone, his sister had made even more beautiful glass figures and boxes and chalices out of clay that turned into crystal, the finest crystal you run here. In fact, it was so fine that sometimes when the wind blew, you could hear musical chimes from the vibrations of the crystals. Winget's son leaped from behind a tree, saw all of her creations and began to destroy them while laughing and hollering and laughing and hollering. And he broke everything except for the one bowl that he did not see. Crystal saw her brother and knew that when he was enraged like this, the only thing she could do was flee. So she began to run. Winget's son jumped up in the air, but oops, he forgot he no longer had wings. And he fell unceremoniously to the ground. But then he picked himself up, dusted himself off, and took after his sister. And he took after her, and they were running, and she was barely able to stay in front of them. And she ran until she got to the water, and she leaped into the water and turned herself into one of the denizens of the river. You won't get away from me this time. And Winget's son leaped up into the air and turned himself into a shark. And he went into the water hunting for his sister. His sister saw the shark coming after her, and she turned herself into a dolphin, an enormous dolphin. And the shark suddenly saw this dolphin coming at him, and the dolphin hit him in the nose, hit him in the side, hit him in the stomach, hit him in the back. And this dolphin kept butting him and butting him and butting him. And in his panic, he turned himself into a smaller fish, trying to get away from the dolphin. And he began to swim as fast as his fins would let him go, as fast as he could, until he got to the water, and he leaped up onto dry land and tried to turn himself back into a boy. His sister leaped up, and when she touched dry land, she was a girl again. And she saw this little bitty fish flopping on the ground. And she took her bowl, dipped it into the water, and put the fish into the bowl. And Winget's son tried and tried and tried, but as much as he tried, he could not turn himself back into a boy. Smiling, his sister took the bowl and the little fish back to the house, set it down, fed the little fish, because eventually he got hungry and he ate what she fed him, and watched it swim around in circles. Then she went back to make more crystal figures out of clay. Uru appeared briefly, and he looked at Winget's son. He said, "You lied to me. Oh, your powers do not work on me. You lied to me. So my brother will keep your wings. But remember, I told you, your new power would punish you. So you have taken the form of a small fish. The form of a small fish you shall remain until the end of your days." Well, when Chef and Maker returned home, Winget's son's gift of Gao was no longer in effect. He could not convince his parents that his sister had done this to him. In fact, he couldn't communicate. But Echo and Repeat sensed something was not right, and putting their powers together, they picked up the thoughts from their brother and conveyed it to their parents. And their parents said, if this is what Uru has done, this is what he deserves. From that day on, Winget's son was no longer Winget's son. Winget's son swam around in a bowl with his fins and his gills, and his sister took care of him until the end of their days. As for the brother of Uru with his wings, well, that's a tale for another day. Oh, there is a lesson in this story. You see, that fish has to swim around the same bowl every day as a reminder that what you do in life counts. And what you do in life, some people call karma when it pays you back. Or as we like to say, what goes around comes around. And like the fish in this story, that is the finish of my tale.
Yeah.
So I hope you enjoyed that. I'm still working on that. There's something, the story was put away so long that the print has faded from the paper that I wrote it on.
So yes, what goes round comes round. Never trouble until trouble troubles you.
That's true.
The rest of it go together. Right. So we go to Donald Nelson on the side of Loch Lomond, he tells me. So your reputation has come south of the border before you, Donald. I have definitely, I don't think we've met in person, but I've definitely heard of you before. A very famous Scottish storyteller and poet.
We may have met briefly in Edinburgh at Duncan Williamson's.
Oh, I beg your pardon. If we have, yes.
I came along with John.
Oh, did you? I do apologise. I am terrible.
And I had to share a room with him.
Oh dear. Oh. Well, never mind.
The things you do.
Right, yes. I hadn't realised we'd met. Like I said, I've been north of the border many times and I enjoy every trip I go to. After you've finished, we've got Mona. You're going to be next after Donald then. So we up in the Highlands for a story, or are we doing something from another part of the world, Donald?
Well, this story's set in Scotland. I originally got it from an Alexander McCall Smith book on Tales of Africa, but I changed the story for an event I was doing in a school, and I've just kept it that way. So it's set in Scotland. Right, anyway, this is a story of a boy called Rory. And Rory lived in a croft, a small farm in the Highlands of Scotland, with his mum and his dad and his aunt. And Rory sometimes thought that he could not do anything right. Now, I'm sure everybody's felt like that at some time in their life. His mum was always on at him. His dad was always on at him. But most of all, his aunt. His auntie was always telling him to do this and do that and come here and go there and go there and come here. And she called him all sorts of horrible things. You're an idiot and you're always telling lies, and she never believed a word that he said. A bit like the character in Baba's story there. Never believed a word. She said, oh, you tell such terrible, terrible stories. Well, one day she said, Rory, come here. And Rory thought, oh no, here we go. She said, you boy, you lazy, lazy boy, I want you to take this basket and go through the deep, dark woods, because it's always deep. There's never a wood in a story when it's not deep and dark. Go through the deep, dark woods to the other side, to the place where the berries grow. And I want you to fill this basket, which was about that size, and bring it back here. And hurry there and be quick and come back quickly. Hurry back, because I want these berries back by this afternoon. And Rory thought, oh no, I'm going to have to go through the deep, dark wood to the place where the berries grow. And I really don't want to. And he said, Auntie, I really don't want to go and do that. And Auntie said, you're such a lazy boy. Just take the basket and do as you're told for once in your life. And he said, but Auntie, I don't want to go. And she said, well, why on earth not? And he said, well, you see, Auntie, there's some caves there. And Auntie said, and in those caves, there's a monster, and the monster eats people. Oh, another one of your stories, Rory. No wonder they call you Rory. Rory, this story. That's all you are. You know, one day you're going to tell the truth, but it'll be a cold day in hell when you do. Well, Rory looked at the basket and he looked at Auntie and he thought to himself, you know, I would rather be eaten by a monster than spend the rest of my life listening to my auntie shouting and bawling at me and not believing a word I say. And he picked up the basket and he picked up his drum, which he always carried with him, his boran, as we call it, and he went off through the deep, dark wood to the place where the berries grow. And he started to pick. And there was blackberries, and there was raspberries, and there was strawberries, and there was slowberries, and there was all sorts of berries. But if you've ever been berry picking, and you've got a basket that size, you pick and 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 you think you've picked a lot, and you look down and you are lucky if there is that much in the bottom of the basket. Well, Rory thought, this is going to take me all day. I'm never going to be back in time, the time that Auntie told me to. I'm going to be in trouble again for something that is not my fault. And then he heard a noise behind him. And Rory slowly turned. And there, behind him, stood the monster, tall and broad, with long legs and big feet, and long arms with long claws, and a big mouth with fangs, dribbling fangs. And Rory looked at the monster as the monster slowly took a step towards him, then another, and then another. And Rory thought, look at those big long legs, what am I going to do? I'll never be able to outrun him. I've got to think of something to scare him. And then he remembered, on the croft, when the foxes came for the chickens, they would get pots and pans and all sorts of things and bang them together and make a noise. And Rory thought, I've got to think of something to make a noise. Ah, my drum. So he picked up his drum and he started to play. And the monster walked towards him, and then the monster stopped. And the monster started to dance. And Rory was amazed. And he played faster and faster. And the monster danced faster and 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 faster until the monster suddenly stopped. And he turned. And he walked back to his cave, exhausted, and lay down and well, Rory, he was exhausted as well, but he held onto his drum and he grabbed the handle of the basket and he started to run. And he ran through the forest as fast as he can. And as he ran, the basket was bouncing on the ground. And as the basket was bouncing on the ground, all the berries were flying out. And when he got back and Auntie saw him, she said, where have you been? Where have you been? Look at the time. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I wanted you back earlier than this. And what have you been doing? You've only picked one berry, you lazy, lazy boy. And Rory said, but Auntie, I had lots of berries in the basket and the monster came and I had to run away. And she said, oh, stop stuffing nonsense. You're always making up stories, boy. You're so lazy. Get out of my sight. Well, Rory slowly walked away, head bowed, feeling really sad that Auntie didn't believe him once again. And Dad was out in the garden, and Dad said to Rory, what's wrong with you? And Rory told him about going to pick the berries, and about Auntie shouting at him, and about the monster, and how he had to run home to safety. And his dad thought for a moment, and his dad sort of believed him, because although his dad had never seen the monster, when his dad was a boy, he used to get sent through the deep dark wood to the other side, to the place where the berries grow. And he would be really scared. He was always watching his back when he was picking berries, and he picked them as fast as he could, and he ran home as well. And his dad said, look, Rory, it's autumn, and winter is coming soon, and we need these berries. We need as much food as we can to store for the winter. What we'll do is tomorrow, you, your mum, your auntie, and me will all go and pick berries. There'll be 4 of us. And that means we can pick lots of berries really quickly and get back. Well, Rory didn't really want to, but he felt a bit safer if his mum and dad was going there. And he said his auntie got to come and he said, yes, we need the more people the quicker we'll get the berries picked. So the next morning they all set off, baskets in hand, and Rory, of course, with his drum. And they walked through and they started to pick. And they were picking pretty well. And they heard a noise behind them. And they turned. And there was a monster. Oh no. The monster walked towards them. And they all started to run. They all started to run except Rory. Rory didn't run because when they had arrived at the place where the berries grow, Auntie took Rory's drum and said, "Give me that drum, boy. You're not going to play that drum while we're all working away. You'll get it back when we're finished." And she hung it up on the branch of a tree just out of Rory's reach. Well, Mum, Dad and Auntie, when they saw the monster, they started to run, and they were running and running and running. And the monster just took a few steps and picked up Dad, and one gulp swallowed him. And Mum was running, and the monster just took another couple of steps in his big long legs. Swallowed Mum in one gulp. And he turned round and there was Auntie, standing shivering with fear, and he picked Auntie up and picked up. Well, Auntie never agreed with anybody. And he turned to Rory. Now, while the rest of his family were getting eaten, Rory was climbing the tree and he managed to get his drum back. And as the monster approached, he started to play. And the monster started to dance. And Rory played faster, 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 faster. And the monster danced faster and faster until the monster, he got the hiccups. He just had a belly full of food and he was dancing. And he did one enormous. And out popped Dad. And Dad ran and hid behind a tree. And then he did another. And out popped Mum. And Mum ran behind the tree. And then Granny popped out. And Granny hid behind the tree. And Rory held on to his drum. And the monster took a step towards him. And he started to play again. Faster and faster and faster. And the monster danced faster and 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 faster until the monster got so tired. Once again, he turned, went back to his cave. Well, Mum, Dad, Auntie and Rory didn't hang about. They grabbed their baskets, held onto them tight, didn't let them bounce on the ground, and they ran back as fast as they could to their little croft house, slammed the door, pushed the table against it, and took a breath. Well, they never saw the monster again, but from that day on, Auntie never shouted at Rory, never shouted at him again. In fact, she didn't even speak to him, unless it was to say please and thank you and excuse me and anything else polite that she had never said to him before. And because of this, Rory and Auntie didn't just become auntie and nephew, they became very good friends. Thank you.
Oh, lovely. That was lovely, Donald. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Really beautiful. Yeah, yeah. And so we do this every other Sunday. I think it's the first time you've been here. You'd be very welcome to come along. You've seen how it all works. About 8 o'clock, I'll pick a glass up and I can sit here all night listening to stories like that. I really can. So.
Well, anytime you're in Bala, Loch Lomond, beautiful place. You're very welcome.
Yeah, my only trouble with Scotland from about now on is the midges all about that big, and they only eat Englishmen.
Yeah, well, you don't watch out for the midges that big. It's the midges that big. The ones that sneak up on you, the ones with bobtail boots and fangs like the monster in that story.
Yeah. They always find me as well. Right, so we're going to go to Rona. I think you're the last one tonight, Rona. Last but very much not least, it's lovely to be in your company again, even if it is on Zoom. Rona. You're going to have to unmute yourself, mate.
It's just so sweet. Thank you, Mike. That's lovely. Well, I'll tell you, not too long a story. And of course, I think, well, not of course, I don't know why I said of course, but this particular story involves a king. And not a very pleasant king. He was really grumpy. And he had the power to destroy people just with a flick of his finger. And even if somebody had done something that he just found quite annoying, he would demand that their head was removed. And his wife really was trying to calm him down a bit and get him to be a wee bit more, you know, kind and gentle with his people, but she was fighting a losing battle. But she didn't give up. And he had just recently lost his best advisor, so that made him even more bad-tempered than ever. And there was to be an execution that day. Somebody was going to have their head removed with the sharpest axe and the biggest axe that you could ever imagine. It was huge. And his wife was concerned about this because, you know, back in the day, all those hundreds of years ago, executions were seen as a bit of an entertainment. The whole family would turn up with a picnic to see an execution, including the children. It was barbaric. And his wife was one of the first people to really feel that that should change. The Queen was adamant that she would soften her husband in some way or other. And she found the perfect opportunity that day because she said to him, you know that man that you're having executed because he stole a loaf of bread? A loaf of bread, my dear. Don't interfere with my business, he said. She said, no, but I just want to make you aware of something you should know. Well, that was the thing. She always knew how to get him, because if he said something like that, that was it. He couldn't rest until he heard what it was she had to say. He tried to resist, but it didn't last long, all of 2 minutes. And then he said, well, tell me, what do I need to know? She said, you know that man that you're going to have executed for stealing a loaf of bread? I know. She said, no, you don't understand. That man is supposed to be super intelligent, and you've just lost your best advisor. It doesn't seem like a very wise thing to do, to kill a man who's very intelligent, and you've just lost your best advisor. No. And how intelligent is he? She says, I don't know. I only know that, you know, everybody seems to think this man is super intelligent. Why don't you try and find out before you had his head removed? So he did. I mean, the execution was all set up. The man was up there ready to put his head on the slab. The executioner was stood behind him, arms folded, but with his axe in his hand, a great big heavy axe, and he was swinging it to and fro, getting bored, thinking to himself, come on, Your Majesty, what's keeping you? And when the king stepped out into the arena with his wife and the crowd all cheered and clapped, he waited until it quieted down, and then he said to the man, you, sir. And the man was quite startled. Yes, Your Majesty. Is it true that you're really intelligent? Well, I can't say, Your Majesty. That's for others to say. But why don't you test me? And the Queen silently thought, yes, this man's really clever. And the king said, yes, then I will. Come here. And the man had to come down off there and walk all the way along the front of the crowd until he came to where the king was sat up beside the Queen on their thrones in the arena. And he stood in front of him, and then the king did something that he had never done before, and the crowd gasped. He stood up and walked down to the man. And of course, guards came straight over and stood by his side. And he said to one of the guards, "Go and get me some chalk." And the guard disappeared as fast as you like and was back seconds later with some chalk. The next thing the king did had people gasping. Oh, wow. He knelt down in front of the man, but most of them couldn't see what was going on, and they were clambering on top of each other to try and see why was the king on his knees. And the king took that chalk and he drew a line. And then he said to the man, "If you're really clever, you'll be able to make that line shorter without touching it with any part of your body, without touching it with any part of your being." And the man stood and looked for a minute. And it was a warm, dry day, and the chalk mark had just been made. So he thought, oh, I could get down and blow really hard, and some of that chalk will move, making the line shorter. But then he thought, no, that's me using my breath. I'll still get executed if I do that. He said, without any part of me or my being. Oh, and he struggled. If I stood and cast a shadow over it, that would make it smaller. So he tried that. He moved around and his shadow fell, and it fell across the line. But the line was still very visible. It was white chalk. And he thought, and then he thought, and then it came to him. And he said to the king, "Your Majesty, may I use the chalk?" And the king looked at him, and there was a murmur from the crowd. And the king said, "Well, yes." And the man knelt down this time, and he drew a line in front of the king's line, but he made it longer. And then he stood up and handed the chalk back to the guard, and he said, "I think you'll find, Your Majesty, that your line is now shorter because it's shorter than mine." And the crowd went wild. They were laughing and cheering and clapping, especially the man's wife and children. And they ran up and hugged him. And the king wanted to be angry, but he couldn't help himself. He just knew that this man was super intelligent and was exactly what he needed. So he said, "What I want you to do now then is, instead of losing your head, I'm going to give you a job. I want you to come and work with me in the palace as my advisor." And the man looked to his wife and his children. And the king said, "Of course, with your family, you'll have your own quarters." Well, they were ecstatic. And even the crowd, who were not going to benefit from this in any way, shape or form, and were actually a wee bit disappointed that there hadn't been an execution, were nevertheless overjoyed at this man's good fortune. Well, the story doesn't end quite there, because there was one man who was absolutely livid, and that was the executioner. His face was set in stone and that axe was still swinging. He wasn't going to earn his money that day. Thank you.
Well, no, that's a lovely story, and thank you very much. So we've come to the end of tonight. It's 9:10. I started at 7 o'clock. John was here and we're all here, and we've had a couple of hours of just people sitting around doing stories and poems and all the stuff we've come. You're all invited back in 2 weeks' time. Every person that's here, you're all invited back. All come and do it again, because that's all we ever do. And it's a quiet little story round, and I thoroughly look forward to it. And thank you all very much for coming, because I couldn't do this unless people like you turned up to do what you do. So to the new people here who I haven't seen here before, it's Chandrika and to B and to Donald. I very much hope you'll come and visit with me again sometime. The World Storytelling Cafe is led by John and Mike Wood in conjunction with the Get a Word in Edgeways, which is our festival here in Shropshire. And mark down Keith, who you've always, I think you're as loyal as you ever have been coming to these sessions, Keith, and for Baba, who I don't think you've missed one from all the starting of it all, and Mona, who you are completely regular as anything, and Despina, who you come very, very often. The date will be the 25th of November. They're going to have a great festival in February, but just quietly, without bothering anybody, without any hoo-ha, I'm going to run one of these sessions in Marrakesh in the World Storytelling Centre, and we're going to do it live and stream it live. And we'll work out a way of how to get everybody there in the future. But once we get there, and so, like I said, try and keep those dates clear from the people who come on a regular basis. And we'll talk to you privately about how we try to get you there. And Mike Wood and John are working out where we're going to sleep and all the rest of it. And so we're working on that. I'm not going to say anything more about that until we've run our festival. We're 7 weeks out from our festival now. And you can imagine the time that it takes and the work and all involved and everything else. It's coming together well. The schools are involved, the artists are booked, Chandrika is going to be there and everything else. And it's getting to the time when we really look forward.
Right.
Sitting in the middle of a field in Shropshire and meeting all my pals. Okay.
Whoa. Well,
thanks, John.
I hope I make it, Mike, and thanks very much for hosting tonight. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure,
Mike, you've been a magnificent host as always. Thank you. And the tellers have been amazing as always. And Ali, thank you very much for flying our magic carpet for us.
Absolutely, Ali, if you're there. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person in November. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Ali, as usual.
Okay, mate.
Ali's in that wee white box that says World Storytelling Cafe.
Yeah, he's in there somewhere.
Everybody that makes their way to Marrakesh, you definitely have to meet Ali. He's a very nice fellow, and he will look after you. If he tells you don't do something, don't do it. If he tells you to do something,
do it. Yeah.
Spot on. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's great people.
But for the moment, he's gone back inside his lamp. Right. So
okay, John.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Good night.
Thanks very much, John. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
See you Tuesday, John.
See you. Nice one.
See you all again. Bye.
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 Until the next time, take care.
Next time.
You're wonderful. All of you are. Oh, it's supper time for me. See you all later.